A man accustomed to power and luxury saw his life change through a simple encounter. A fearless young woman faced the world alone, unknowing that someone unexpected would cross her path. Amidst challenges, pride, and uncontrollable feelings, their lives intertwined in an unlikely way. But can love really overcome all barriers? Before you dive into this captivating story, don't forget to follow more stories like this. Richard Montgomery was a man accustomed to having the world at his feet. At 38, he commanded a financial empire that shook the foundations of the national economy. His name was synonymous with power. His presence caused a stir wherever he went. On that sunny summer afternoon, as his private driver navigated the luxurious limousine through the downtown streets, Richard could hardly imagine his life was about to change forever. The traffic was particularly chaotic that day. Impatient, Richard asked the driver to stop the car. He decided to walk the rest of the way to the building where his next meeting would take place. After all, what harm could a short walk do? Little did he know those few steps would lead him to an encounter that would redefine the entire course of his existence. Then he saw her for the first time. Amid the hurried crowd and the deafening noise of cars, a melodious yet determined voice stood out. "Ice-cold water. Who wants ice-cold water? Hydrate in this heat." Richard instinctively turned toward the voice. His eyes landed on a young woman, no older than 25, her dark hair tied in a messy ponytail, her sun-kissed skin glistening with sweat. She wore a simple t-shirt and denim shorts, carrying a cooler full of water bottles. What caught Richard's attention most, however, was the intense spark in her eyes, a mix of determination and joy he rarely saw in the social circles he frequented. "Hey, miss," Richard called out, hardly realizing what he was doing. "How much?" "For the water." The young woman approached with a bright smile. $3, sir. It's ice-cold, perfect for this heat." Richard pulled a $100 bill from his wallet. "Give me all the water you have." Her eyes widened in surprise. "All of it? But, sir, there are so many bottles." "No problem," Richard replied with a half-smile. "Give the rest to anyone who needs it." The young woman hesitated for a moment, as if trying to decipher the true intentions of this well-dressed man. Finally, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Thank you so much, sir. May God bless you." It was at that moment that something unusual happened. A burly, scowling man approached, shouting, "Hey, you scammer! Yesterday you charged me $5 for the same water." The young vendor turned around, her expression instantly shifting from gratitude to indignation. "You must be mistaken. My prices are always the same, $3 a bottle. I've never charged more than that." The man stepped forward, threatening. "Are you calling me a liar? You—" Before he could finish, Richard stepped between them. His imposing presence made the man take a step back. "Is there a problem here?" Richard asked, his voice calm but laced with authority. The man muttered something unintelligible and quickly walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Richard turned to the young vendor, who looked at him with a mix of gratitude and admiration. "Thank you," she said. "But you didn't have to trouble yourself. I can handle things." Richard smiled, intrigued by the woman's strength. "I don't doubt that. What's your name?" "Marianne," she replied, extending her hand. "Marianne Sanders." "Richard Montgomery," he introduced himself, shaking her hand. He noticed the calluses on her fingers, a sign of hard work. At that moment, something inexplicable happened. A shiver ran down Richard's spine, a sensation he hadn't felt in a long time. There was something about that young woman, about Marianne, that fascinated him. It wasn't just her natural beauty or her determination. It was something more, something he couldn't quite define. "Do you always work around here, Marianne?" he asked, trying to keep the conversation going. "Every day," she replied proudly. "I'm saving up for college. I want to be a lawyer." Richard raised his eyebrows, impressed. "Lawyer? That's a noble profession." Marianne nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "I want to make a difference, you know. Help people who don't have a voice." Those words struck Richard in a way he hadn't expected. How many times had he used his power and influence only for his own benefit? How many times had he ignored the needs of the less fortunate? "Well, Marianne," he said, pulling a business card from his pocket. "If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out." Marianne took the card, studying it curiously. Her eyes widened as she read the company name. "Wait, you're Richard Montgomery? The owner of the Montgomery Group?" Richard nodded, slightly uncomfortable. Usually when people found out who he was, their behavior changed completely. They became flattering, opportunistic. But to his surprise, Marianne just smiled and tucked the card into her pocket. "Thank you, Mr. Montgomery, but don't worry, I won't bother you. I prefer to achieve my goals through my own efforts." That response caught Richard off guard. He was used to people begging for favors, for a chance to enter his circle of influence. But here was a young woman who, even when faced with a golden opportunity, stayed true to her principles. "Admirable," Richard said, unable to hide a smile. "Well, Marianne, so it was a pleasure meeting you. Good luck with your studies." As he walked away, Richard couldn't get Marianne out of his thoughts. There was something about her, a strength, a determination that intrigued him deeply. For the first time in years, he found himself thinking about someone outside his usual social circle. In the days that followed, Richard coincidentally found himself passing by the same street, always at the time he knew Marianne would be selling water. Each brief conversation, each exchanged smile made his interest in her grow. A week after their first meeting, Richard decided to take a bolder step. Spotting Marianne at her usual spot, he approached with a smile. "Good afternoon, Marianne. How are sales going today?" Marianne greeted him with a warm smile. "Mr. Montgomery, what a pleasant surprise. Sales are going well, thank you for asking." Richard hesitated for a moment, gathering courage for what he was about to propose. "Marianne, I was thinking, would you like to have lunch with me one of these days to talk about your plans for law school?" Marianne's smile faltered for a second, replaced by an expression of surprise and perhaps a hint of suspicion. "Mr. Montgomery, I don't know if that would be appropriate." Richard immediately noticed her discomfort and hurried to clarify. "Don't misunderstand me, please. It's just a professional lunch. I have contacts in the legal field who could be useful to you. I only want to help." Marianne studied him for a few seconds, as if weighing his true intentions. Finally, her expression softened. "All right, Mr. Montgomery, I accept your invitation, but on one condition." "And what would that be?" asked Richard, intrigued. "I pick the place," replied Marianne with a mischievous smile. "And it has to be a simple restaurant, nothing fancy." Richard couldn't hold back a laugh. "Deal, you choose the place, I'll pay the bill. How about Friday?" Marianne nodded. "Friday works great. Noon?" "Perfect," agreed Richard. "We'll meet here and you can take me to your favorite restaurant." As he said goodbye to Marianne and walked back to his office, Richard found himself smiling in a way he hadn't in years. There was something about that young water vendor that stirred long-dormant feelings within him. Feelings of curiosity, admiration, and perhaps, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet, something deeper. What Richard didn't know was that this simple lunch would be just the beginning of a journey that would transform his life in ways he could never have imagined. Marianne Sanders, the determined water vendor with dreams of becoming a lawyer, was about to turn his world upside down. And so, as the sun set over the bustling city, casting long shadows across the busy streets, fate began weaving its intricate threads, bringing together the lives of two people from such different worlds. The stage was set for an unlikely love story, full of challenges, revelations, and profound transformations. Little did Richard and Marianne know that their paths, so distinct until then, were about to intertwine irrevocably, leading them on a journey of self-discovery, perseverance, and perhaps a love capable of transcending all barriers. The day of the lunch arrived faster than Richard expected. For the first time in years, he felt nervous preparing for a meeting. He opted for a more casual outfit, jeans and a polo shirt, hoping not to seem too out of place at the restaurant Marianne had chosen. When he arrived at the meeting point, he spotted her from a distance. Marianne looked different. She wore a simple yet elegant dress, and her hair, usually tied up, fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She smiled when she saw him, a smile that made Richard's heart inexplicably race. "Good afternoon, Mr. Montgomery," she greeted, extending her hand. Richard took it, noticing how soft her skin was despite the calluses from work. "Please call me Richard. After all, this isn't a business meeting, is it?" Marianne nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "All right, Richard, ready to try the best feijoada in town." Richard raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Feijoada? Don't tell me we're going to—" "Exactly," Marianne exclaimed, her eyes shining with excitement. "Aunt Ziza's Tavern, the best place for feijoada on this side of the city." Richard couldn't suppress a smile. In all his years as a successful businessman, he had never set foot in a tavern. This would undoubtedly be a unique experience. Aunt Ziza's Tavern was exactly as Richard had imagined, small, cozy, and full of life. The wooden tables were occupied by local workers, the air filled with the tempting aroma of beans and meat. Aunt Ziza, a robust woman with a warm smile, greeted them personally. "Marianne, my dear, and who is this handsome young man you've brought?" Marianne introduced Richard, who was immediately enveloped in Aunt Ziza's tight hug. "Welcome, my son. Any friend of Marianne's is a friend of Ziza's." Seated at the table, Richard watched fascinated as Marianne interacted with the people around her. She knew everyone by name, asked about their families, shared laughs. It was as if she lit up the room with her presence. "You really love it here, don't you?" Richard asked, charmed by the sparkle in her eyes. Marianne nodded, smiling. "This place is like a second home to me. When I first came to the city, knowing no one, Aunt Ziza took me in like a daughter. It was here that I got my first job as a waitress." The conversation flowed naturally as they enjoyed the feijoada. Richard learned that Marianne was the eldest daughter of a humble family from the countryside. From an early age, she dreamed of becoming a lawyer to help people who, like her family, often lacked access to justice. "But why sell water?" Richard asked, intrigued. "Wouldn't it be easier to work at a restaurant like here?" Marianne took a sip of water before answering. "The hours are more flexible. I can study in the morning and sell water in the afternoon. Besides—" She hesitated for a moment. "I earn more. Every penny counts when you're saving for college." Richard felt a pang of admiration and, at the same time, guilt. Here was a young woman fighting with all her might for an opportunity, while he had everything within reach. "And you?" Marianne asked, pulling Richard from his thoughts. "What's it like being the great Richard Montgomery? Must be thrilling to run a financial empire." Richard shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable. "Not really. Actually, sometimes it's lonely." Marianne tilted her head, curious. "Lonely? With all your success?" "Success doesn't always bring happiness, Marianne," Richard replied, surprised by his own honesty. "Sometimes the higher you climb, the harder it is to find people who care about you, and not just what you can offer." A heavy silence fell over the table, thick with mutual understanding. It was Marianne who broke it, her voice soft but firm. "Well, Richard, I think you've just gained a friend who cares about you, not your money." Those words struck Richard like lightning. He looked at Marianne, seeing sincerity in her eyes, and felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The rest of lunch passed in an atmosphere of newfound camaraderie. Richard found himself laughing more than he had in years, charmed by Marianne's stories about her life in the countryside and her adventures in the big city. When they finally left the tavern, the afternoon sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Richard offered to drive Marianne home, but she politely declined. "Thank you, but I'd rather take the bus. It's part of my routine, you know. Helps keep me grounded." Richard nodded, respecting her decision. "I understand. Well, Marianne, I really enjoyed this lunch. Could we do it again sometime?" Marianne smiled, a smile that lit up her entire face. "Of course, Richard, that would be great." As he watched Marianne walk toward the bus stop, Richard felt a strange mix of emotions. Admiration for the strength and determination of that young woman. Gratitude for the simplicity and honesty she had brought back into his life. And something more, something he couldn't yet name, but that made his heart beat faster. That night, lying in his king-size bed in the penthouse, Richard couldn't get Marianne out of his thoughts. Her laughter, her uncomplicated way of seeing life, the passion with which she spoke of her dreams. Everything about her fascinated him. It was then that an idea began to form in his mind. An idea that could change everything, not just for Marianne but for himself. Richard fell asleep with a smile on his lips, eager for dawn and the possibilities it would bring. What Richard didn't know was that, while he was planning a surprise for Marianne, fate was preparing its own twists. The path ahead of them was far from smooth, filled with obstacles that would test not only their feelings for each other, but also their own values and convictions. The next morning, Richard woke with renewed determination. He called his personal assistant even before breakfast. "Charles, I need you to do some research for me. I want to know everything about the available law school scholarships in the city, and also see if you can find any information about the Sanders family's financial situation. The first name is Marianne." On the other end of the line, Charles hesitated. "Sir, wouldn't that be an invasion of privacy?" Richard paused, considering the question. "You're right, Charles. Forget the part about the family. Just look into the scholarships, please." Hanging up the phone, Richard found himself reflecting on his actions. Why was he so determined to help Marianne? Was it just admiration for her resolve? Or was there something more? Meanwhile, in a small apartment across town, Marianne also woke with conflicting thoughts. Lunch with Richard had been surprisingly pleasant. He wasn't at all what she'd expected from a billionaire businessman. There was a vulnerability in him, a loneliness that had touched her deeply. But Marianne was also aware of the dangers. She couldn't afford to be distracted from her goals. Law school was her dream, her chance to change not just her life but her family's. She couldn't risk everything for a man, no matter how intriguing he was. That morning, as she prepared for another day of selling water on the streets, Marianne made a promise to herself. She would keep Richard Montgomery as a friend, nothing more. Her heart couldn't afford to dream beyond that. Little did she know fate had other plans. Plans that would involve difficult choices, unexpected sacrifices, and perhaps the discovery of a love capable of overcoming all barriers. As the sun rose on the horizon, casting its golden light over the waking city, Richard and Marianne's paths were about to cross again, and this time the consequences would be far greater than either of them could imagine. The weeks following their lunch at Aunt Ziza's tavern brought subtle but significant changes for both Richard and Marianne. Casual encounters became more frequent, with Richard always finding an excuse to pass by the street where Marianne sold water. On a particularly hot afternoon, Richard arrived with a surprise, a small portable electric cooler. "To keep your water always cold," he explained, handing the gift to a stunned Marianne. "Richard, I can't accept this," she protested, though her eyes sparkled at the sight of the device. "Consider it an investment in your business," he insisted with a smile. "Tessa, colder water, more sales, more savings for college. It's a win-win situation." Reluctant but grateful, Marianne accepted the gift. Richard's gesture, though generous, left her with mixed feelings. On one hand, she was touched by his thoughtfulness. On the other, she feared becoming dependent on his help. Meanwhile, in Richard's office, things weren't going so well. His growing distraction hadn't gone unnoticed by his partners and executives. During a particularly tense meeting, Gavin, his right-hand man and longtime friend, confronted him. "Richard, what's going on with you? You've been absent, distracted. The company needs your full attention." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Sorry, Gavin, I've just had a lot on my mind lately." Gavin narrowed his eyes, studying his friend. "Does this have something to do with that water vendor? I've heard rumors you've been seen with her." Richard straightened in his chair, suddenly defensive. "What if it does? My personal life is no one's business." "It is when it starts affecting the company," Gavin shot back. "Richard, whatever this is, end it quickly. We have important deals coming up, and we can't afford to have you distracted." Gavin's words weighed on Richard for the rest of the day. He knew his friend was right. The company needed him. But for the first time in his life, Richard wondered if this was what he truly wanted. That night, unable to sleep, Richard made a decision. He picked up his phone and typed a message to Marianne. "I need to talk to you. Can we meet tomorrow?" The reply came almost instantly. "Of course. Same place as usual after my shift?" "Perfect. See you then," Richard responded, a mix of anxiety and anticipation washing over him. The next day, Marianne immediately noticed something was different. Richard seemed tense, worried. "Is everything okay?" she asked, the concern evident in her. Fair Richard took a deep breath before answering, "Marianne, I have something to tell you and to ask you." Marianne's heart raced. "What is it, Richard?" "I did some research," he began hesitantly, "about scholarships for law school, and I want to pay for your education." Marianne was stunned, unable to process what she had just heard. "What? No, Richard, I can't accept that. It's too much." "Please, just listen," Richard insisted, gently holding her hands. "You're brilliant, Marianne. You have incredible potential. I don't want you to spend years struggling to save money when you could be pursuing your dream right now." Tears welled up in Marianne's eyes. "Richard, I don't know what to say. It's an incredible offer, but—" "But?" Richard asked, his heart tightening. "But I can't accept it," Marianne finally said, her voice trembling. "I can't owe someone that much. It wouldn't be fair." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "Marianne, you wouldn't owe me anything. It's a gift, no strings attached." Marianne shook her head, wiping away her tears. "There's no such thing as a gift without strings attached, Richard, especially one this big. I appreciate it, I really do, but I need to do this on my own." The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unspoken emotions. Richard struggled to understand why his offer, which he saw as a gesture of love and support, was being rejected. "There's something else," he finally said, his voice low. "Marianne, I think I'm falling in love with you." Marianne's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and something else, fear, hope. "Richard, please don't say that." "Why not?" "It's the truth," he insisted, taking a step toward her. Marianne stepped back, shaking her head. "It can't be. We're from different worlds, Richard. This could never work." "I don't believe that," Richard argued. "What matters is how we feel about each other. The rest we can figure out together." But Marianne stood firm. "I'm sorry, Richard. I need time to think. Please understand." With a heavy heart, Richard nodded. "All right, I understand. Just don't disappear, okay?" Marianne silently agreed, then turned and walked away, leaving Richard alone with his swirling thoughts. In the weeks that followed, the distance between them was painful for both. Richard threw himself into work, trying to fill the void he felt. Marianne, meanwhile, wrestled with her own conflicting emotions. It was during this period that fate decided to throw another curveball into their story. On an ordinary morning, Marianne received news that would change everything. Her mother had been in an accident and needed an expensive surgery. Desperate and unsure what to do, Marianne found herself at a crossroads. Should she swallow her pride and ask Richard for help, or maintain her independence even if it meant delaying her dreams even further? Meanwhile, unaware of Marianne's dilemma, Richard was facing his own challenges. The pressure at work was mounting, and he found himself increasingly questioning his life priorities. An opportunity to expand the business overseas had arisen, promising even greater success and wealth, but accepting it would mean drifting further away from Marianne. In Bai, their respective corners of the city, both Richard and Marianne found themselves at a decisive moment. The choices they made now would shape not only their individual futures, but also the fate of the budding love between them. Richard, seated in his luxurious office, gazed out the window at the city below, thinking of Marianne. Should he go after her, insist on his feelings, or respect her need for space and time? Marianne, meanwhile, walked the familiar streets where she sold water, Richard's business card burning in her pocket. Calling him would mean admitting she needed help, that perhaps she wasn't as independent as she wanted to be. But not calling could mean giving up everything she had fought for until now. Night fell over the city, enveloping both Richard and Marianne in a cloak of doubts and possibilities. The decisions they would make in the next few hours would define the course of their lives and, unbeknownst to them, intertwine their destinies in ways neither could predict. The sound of a ringing phone broke the silence. The phone's ring echoed through Richard's apartment, shattering the night's quiet. With a racing heart, he answered, instantly recognizing the voice on the other end. "Richard." Marianne's voice trembled slightly. I need your help." In the blink of an eye, Richard was on his way to the hospital. Marianne's words still echoed in his ears. Her mother needed urgent surgery and she couldn't afford it. The hesitation in her voice, the reluctance to ask for help, all of it touched Richard deeply. When he arrived at the hospital, Richard found Marianne in the waiting room, her eyes red from crying. Without a second thought, he pulled her into a tight embrace. "Everything will be okay," he whispered, stroking her hair. "I'm here." Marianne allowed herself to relax in his arms for a moment, before pulling away, wiping her tears. "Richard, I'm so sorry to bother you, but I didn't know who else to turn to." "You could never be a bother to me, Marianne," Richard replied firmly. "Now tell me exactly what's happening." While Marianne explained the situation, the accident, the need for an expensive and complex surgery, Richard was already formulating a plan in his mind. With a few quick phone calls, he managed not only to secure the best surgeon in the city, but also a private room for Marianne's mother. Hours passed, and finally the doctor stepped out of the operating room with good news. The surgery had been a success, and Marianne's mother was out of danger. The relief that washed over Marianne's face was like a balm to Richard's heart. "I don't know how to thank you," Marianne said, her voice thick with emotion. Richard took her hands, looking into her eyes. "You don't have to thank me. I'd do anything for you, Marianne." The moment was interrupted by the sound of Richard's phone. It was Gavin, his business partner, reminding him of the important meeting about the company's international expansion, scheduled for the next morning. Reality crashed over Richard like a bucket of cold water. On one side was Marianne, the woman he was falling for, vulnerable and needing him. On the other, his company, years of hard work and the future he'd always dreamed of. "Go," Marianne said softly, sensing his inner conflict. "I'll be fine. My mother is out of danger now, thanks to you." Richard hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I can stay if you need me." Marianne shook her head, forcing a smile. "I'm sure you've already done more than I could ask. Besides," she added with a touch of humor, "someone has to work to pay this hospital bill, right?" Richard laughed, relieved by Marianne's attempt to lighten the mood, but as he said goodbye, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them. In the days that followed, Richard found himself torn between two worlds. During the day, he threw himself into preparations for the company's international expansion. At night, he rushed to the hospital to see Marianne and her mother. It was during one of these late-night visits that Richard found Marianne in the hospital garden, gazing thoughtfully at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, sitting beside her. Marianne sighed. "How life can change in an instant. How wrong I was about so many things." Richard looked at her, intrigued. "What things?" "About independence, about not needing anyone," Marianne replied, turning to face him. "Richard, what you did for me and my mother, I'll never forget it, and it made me realize that sometimes it's okay to need help." Richard's heart raced. "Marianne, But before he could continue, Marianne placed a finger on his lips. "Let me finish, please. I also realized something else, something that scares me, but I can't deny it anymore." She paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. "I think I'm falling in love with you too, Richard." The world seemed to stop in that moment. Richard gazed into Marianne's eyes, seeing his own feelings reflected in them. Slowly he leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a soft, promising kiss. When they pulled apart, both smiled, a mix of joy and apprehension in their eyes. "What now?" Marianne asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now," Richard answered, holding her hands. "We figure it out together, step by step." But the path ahead wouldn't be easy. As Richard and Marianne navigated the early days of their budding relationship, the world around them kept turning, bringing new challenges and complications. At the company, Gavin began to Notice Richard's frequent absences and his distraction during important meetings. "Richard, we need to talk," he said one day, his tone serious. "The international expansion is at a critical stage. We need you 100% focused." Richard knew his friend and business partner was right, but the thought of pulling away from Marianne, especially now, was painful. "I know, Gavin. I'll try harder, I promise." Meanwhile, Marianne faced her own dilemmas. With her mother recovering, she found herself torn between her desire to be with Richard and the fear of losing her identity, of becoming just the billionaire's girlfriend. One afternoon, as they walked through the park, Marianne voiced her concerns. "Richard, I love being with you, but what about my dreams, my independence? I don't want to lose myself in this relationship." Richard stopped and turned to face her. "Marianne, I would never ask you to give up who you are or what you want. Your spirit, your determination, that's what made me fall in love with you in the first place." His words brought comfort, but doubts lingered. How could she balance love and ambition? How could they navigate a relationship between two such different worlds? As days turned into weeks, Richard and Marianne discovered that love, no matter how strong, wasn't a magical solution to every problem. Each day brought new challenges, new difficult choices. One evening, during a romantic dinner, Richard made a proposal that would change everything. "Marianne, I've been thinking, what if you came to live with me? It would be easier for you to study, closer to the university." Marianne fell silent for a long moment, her face a mix of conflicting emotions. Richard's offer was tempting, a chance to leave financial struggles behind and focus on her studies, but it also meant leaving her world, her hard-won independence. I need to think about it," she finally replied, her voice trembling. Richard nodded, respecting her hesitation, but inside a fear began to grow. What if the gap between their worlds was too wide to bridge? As the night wore on, both Richard and Marianne found themselves caught in a web of love, fear, and expectations. The future, once so clear, was now shrouded in a fog of uncertainty. The distant sound of a siren echoed through the city, a sharp reminder that the world outside kept turning, indifferent to the dramas of the heart. Richard and Marianne looked at each other, their eyes reflecting the same silent question: where do we go from here? The answer, they knew, wouldn't be easy to find, but as long as they were together, there was hope. And so, hand in hand, they prepared to face whatever fate had in store for them, one step at a time. The weeks following Richard's proposal were an emotional roller coaster for the couple. Torn between her love for Richard and her desire for independence, Marianne finally made a decision. She would agree to live with him, but on one condition. "I want to pay rent," she said firmly, surprising Richard. "Not much. I know I can't afford what it's really worth, but enough to feel like I'm contributing." Richard, initially reluctant, eventually agreed, understanding how important this was to Marianne. "All right, we'll do it your way." The change brought a new dynamic to their relationship. Marianne was amazed by the luxury of the penthouse apartment, while Richard discovered the joy of simple things, like eating dinner in front of the TV or grocery shopping, activities he had never done before. However, not everything was perfect. The first real test came when Richard decided to introduce Marianne to his friends at an elegant dinner party. The event was a disaster. Marianne, uncomfortable in her borrowed dress, felt like a fish out of water amid conversations about stocks, yachts, and exotic trips. The pitying and disdainful looks from the guests didn't go unnoticed. The breaking point came when Camille, one of Richard's ex-girlfriends, made a snide remark. "So, Marianne, it must be thrilling for you to be here. I imagine you've never seen this much luxury before, have you?" Marianne felt her face burn with shame and anger. Before she could respond, Richard stepped in. "Camille, please respect my girlfriend." The rest of the evening passed in tense silence. On the way home, the quiet in the car was deafening. "I'm sorry about that," Richard finally said. "They don't know you like I do." Marianne stared out the window, silent tears streaming down her face. "Maybe they're right, Richard. Maybe I don't belong in your world." Her words weighed on Richard for days. He tried hard to show her that their love was stronger than any social differences, but the doubts lingered. Meanwhile, things weren't going well at work either. The company's international expansion was facing obstacles. and Gavin was growing increasingly frustrated with Richard's frequent absences. "Richard, we need to talk," Gavin said one day, his tone serious. "The company needs you. This distraction of yours is costing us millions." Richard tried to argue, but he knew his friend was right. He was neglecting his responsibilities, and it couldn't continue. It was then that fate decided to throw another challenge their way. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity arose, the chance to close a billion-dollar deal in Japan. But there was one condition. Richard would have to move to Tokyo for 6 months. When he broke the news to Marianne, he saw fear in her eyes. "6 months," she whispered. "Richard, what about my college? And what about us?" Richard held her hands. "Come with me, Marianne. We can make this work. You can study online, and when we return, you'll have international experience on your resume." Marianne was silent for a long moment. The idea of leaving everything behind, her family, her studies, her life, was terrifying. But the thought of being apart from Richard for 6 months was equally painful. I need to think," she finally said. The days that followed were tense. Marianne wavered between the excitement of adventure and the fear of the unknown. Richard, in turn, was torn between his love for Marianne and his responsibility to the company. 1 Evening, as they ate dinner in silence, Richard's phone rang. It was Gavin with urgent news. If they didn't close the deal in Japan, the company could face an unprecedented financial crisis. Richard looked at Marianne, the conflict clear in his eyes. She understood immediately. "You need to go," she said softly. "Marianne, She interrupted him with a kiss. "I understand, Richard. It's your company, your legacy. I can't ask you to give that up for me." "Come with me," he pleaded again. Marianne shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I can't. My life is here, my family, my studies. I can't just walk away from everything." The silence that followed was deafening. Both knew what that decision meant. In the weeks leading up to Richard's departure, the couple lived in a bubble of desperate love. Every moment together was precious, every touch filled with meaning. The night before he left, lying in bed holding each other, Richard made a promise. "I'll come back to you, Marianne. 6 months will fly by, you'll see." Marianne nodded, fighting back tears. "I'll be here waiting." The next morning at the airport, the goodbye was painful. As she watched Richard disappear through the boarding gate, Marianne felt as though a part of her was leaving too. Back in the now empty apartment, Marianne found herself surrounded by memories of Richard. Every corner, every object seemed to scream his absence. It was then that she made a difficult decision. She would return to her old home. "I need to rediscover who I am," she told herself as she packed her bags. Meanwhile, miles away, Richard gazed out the airplane window, his heart heavy. The sight of Tokyo approaching brought a mix of emotions, anticipation for the professional challenge ahead, but also deep sorrow for leaving Marianne behind. The months that followed were a trial by fire for the couple. Daily calls, constant messages, but nothing replaced physical presence. Richard threw himself into work, trying not to think about the longing consuming him. Marianne, in turn, rediscovered her independence, focusing on her studies and personal growth. But as time passed, new complications arose. Richard found himself increasingly entangled in business in Tokyo, with the possibility of extending his stay. Marianne, at home, faced the pressures of school and doubts about her future. The distance, which at first seemed surmountable, began to create cracks in their relationship. The calls became less frequent, the messages shorter. The fear that their worlds were irreparably drifting apart began to grow in both of them. One night, during a video call, the tension finally erupted. "Richard, I can't take it anymore," Marianne confessed. "I feel like we're living in completely different worlds." Richard tried to calm her, but his own frustrations surfaced. "What do you want me to do, Marianne? Drop everything and come back?" The silence that followed was deafening. Both knew they had reached a critical point. "Maybe," Marianne began, her voice trembling, "maybe we need some time to think, to figure out what we really want." The words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. "Marianne, Please, don't do this. I love you." "I love you too, Richard," she replied, tears streaming down her face. But sometimes love isn't enough. The call ended, leaving them both in a state of shock and pain. Richard gazed out the window of his Tokyo apartment, the city glittering below, yet feeling lonelier than ever. Marianne, in her small room in the United States, clutched her pillow, sobbing. Fate had dealt another cruel challenge. Now it was up to Richard and Marianne to decide whether their love was strong enough to overcome not just physical distance, but also the chasm between their worlds. As the night deepened, both in Japan and the United States, two tormented souls wrestled with the same question: what do you do when the love of your life seems to be slipping through your fingers? The answer, they knew, wouldn't come easily. But the choices they made in the coming hours and days would define not only their relationship, but the course of their lives forever. The days following their painful video call blurred into a haze of emotions for Richard and Marianne. In Tokyo, Richard buried himself in work like never before, trying to fill the emptiness inside. His nights were spent staring at his phone, torn between the urge to call Marianne and the fear of hearing it was truly over. In the United States, Marianne faced her own inner battle. She returned to selling water on the streets, not out of financial need, but as a way to reconnect with her roots, to remember who she was before Richard entered her life. The nights were long, filled with reflections on love, dreams, and sacrifice. It was during one of these sleepless nights that Marianne had an epiphany. Grabbing her phone, she typed a message to Richard. "We need to talk, for real. Not over the phone, not over video. Face to face." On the other side of the world, Richard's heart leapt at the notification. Without hesitation, he replied, "Name the time and place. I'll be there." 2 days later, Richard was on a plane back to the United States, leaving detailed instructions for his team in Tokyo. The 24-hour journey felt endless, every minute heavy with anxiety and hope. They agreed to meet in a neutral place, Central Park in New York. When Richard spotted Marianne sitting on a bench by the lake, it felt as if the world had stopped turning. She looked both familiar and strange, as though the months apart had changed something fundamental about her. "Hi," he said softly, sitting beside her. Marianne looked at him, her eyes a swirl of emotions. "Hi, Richard. Thank you for coming." For a few moments, they sat in silence, the sound of water and birds filling the air between them. "I missed you," Richard finally said, his voice barely a whisper. Marianne nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I missed you too. But Richard, missing you isn't enough." She paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say. "These months apart have made me realize many things, about myself, about us." Richard felt his heart tighten. "What things?" "I realized that no matter how much I love you, I can't lose who I am. I can't give up my dreams, my identity." Richard reached out, gently touching Marianne's face. "I would never ask that of you. Marianne, your spirit, your determination, that's what made me fall in love with you in the first place." Marianne held his hand, a small smile forming on her lips. "I know, but I also realized we need to find a balance, a middle ground between our worlds." Richard nodded, feeling a thread of hope grow in his chest. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Tell me what you need, Marianne." Marianne took a deep breath before continuing. "I need you to understand that my independence is part of who I am. I can't just be the billionaire's girlfriend. I need to have my own life, my own career." "And I fully support that," Richard replied fervently. "In fact, I've been thinking a lot about it too, about how I can use my resources to help people like you, those with potential but no opportunities." Marianne's eyes sparkled with interest. "What do you have in mind?" Richard smiled, feeling excited for the first time in months. "I've been thinking about starting a foundation to offer scholarships, mentorship programs, internship opportunities. Not just for you, but for hundreds of talented young people who need a chance." Marianne was silent for a moment, processing the idea. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. That's amazing, Richard. Truly incredible. And I want you to be part of this, he continued, taking her hands in his. Not as a beneficiary, but as a partner. You understand the needs, the struggles, your perspective would be invaluable. Marianne felt a wave of emotion rush through her. It was as if all the pieces were finally falling into place. I would love that. Richard pulled her close, wrapping her in a tight embrace. I love you, Marianne. And I promise we'll find a way to make this work. Together. Tears of relief and happiness streamed down Marianne's face as she returned the hug. I love you too, Richard, and I believe in us. In the days that followed, Richard and Marianne worked together not only to rebuild their relationship, but also to bring the foundation idea to life. Richard restructured his businesses, delegating more responsibilities so he could spend more time in the United States. Marianne, in turn, threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor, now with the prospect of using her knowledge to help others. The Bridges to the Future Foundation was launched 6 months later, with Marianne as program director and Richard as board chairman. The project quickly gained recognition, not just for the resources invested, but for its innovative approach combining education, mentorship, and practical opportunities. On a sunny afternoon, as they watched a group of young scholarship recipients participate in a workshop at the Foundation's headquarters, Richard turned to Marianne. You know, I think I finally understand what you meant about balance, he said, a gentle smile on his lips. Marianne looked at him curiously. How so? Before, I thought love meant giving everything to the person you love. Now I understand it's about growing together, supporting each other's dreams. Marianne smiled, intertwining her fingers with his. Exactly. And look at what we've created together. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow over the couple, Richard and Marianne felt a peace they hadn't known in a long time. They had faced challenges, overcome obstacles, and in the process not only saved their love, but transformed it into something stronger and deeper. The road ahead would still have its ups and downs, of that they were certain. But now, with a deeper understanding of each other and a shared purpose, they were ready to face any challenge. Together they weren't just building a life, they were creating a legacy that would outlast their own existence. And so, hand in hand, Richard and Marianne looked to the future with hope and determination, knowing that true love doesn't erase differences but celebrates them, creating something beautiful and lasting in the process. The success of the Bridges to the Future Foundation surpassed all of Richard and Marianne's expectations. In just 1 year, they had already helped hundreds of talented young people enroll in prestigious universities and begin promising careers. The couple found themselves at the center of attention, not just from the media, but also from business and political leaders interested in replicating the model in other parts of the country. Marianne, now a law graduate pursuing a postgraduate degree in social project management, was flourishing in her role as program director. Her personal experience and natural empathy made her an inspiring leader for the Foundation's youth. Richard, in turn, found a new purpose. Though he still managed his businesses, he devoted more and more time and resources to the Foundation. Seeing the tangible impact they were making on people's lives brought a satisfaction no financial profit had ever provided. One Saturday morning, as they drank coffee on the balcony of the apartment they now shared, Richard made an unexpected proposal. What do you think about expanding the Foundation to other countries? Marianne nearly choked on her coffee. Other countries? Isn't that a little too ambitious? Richard smiled, his eyes gleaming with enthusiasm. Think about it, Marianne. What we've done here in the United States can be replicated elsewhere. Imagine the impact we could have in countries with even fewer opportunities. Marianne pondered for a moment. The idea was exciting but also daunting. That would mean a lot of travel, a lot of work, and a lot of adventures, Richard finished, taking her hands. Together. The smile that spread across Marianne's face was all the answer Richard needed. In the weeks that followed, the couple dove headfirst into preparations for international expansion. Nights were spent studying the socio-economic realities of different countries, discussing strategies, and dreaming of possibilities. Their first stop would be India. The country's mix of advanced technology and extreme poverty offered fertile ground for the Foundation's work. Richard and Marianne embarked on a scouting trip, visiting slums in Mumbai and rural schools in Tamil Nadu. It was during this trip that Marianne had an encounter that would change her perspective forever. In a small village on the outskirts of Chennai, she met Priya, a 16-year-old girl with a spark in her eyes that reminded her of her own determination years ago. Priya told Marianne about her dream of becoming an engineer and building water purification systems for her community. But without the means to study, that dream seemed impossible. That night, lying beside Richard in their hotel room, Marianne couldn't hold back her tears. "What's wrong, my love?" Richard asked, concerned. "It's just seeing Priya today reminded me of who I used to be, and it made me realize how far we've come and how much we still have to do," she replied, her voice choked with emotion. Richard held her tightly. "And that's why we're here, to give girls like Priya the same chance you had." The next morning, Marianne surprised Richard with an idea. What if, in addition to scholarships, we offered an exchange program? Bring young people like Priya to the United States for a while and send our scholars to other countries? Richard's eyes lit up. "That's brilliant, Marianne. We wouldn't just be offering education, but also expanding horizons, building cultural bridges." The exchange program idea became the flagship of the Foundation's international expansion. In the months that followed, Richard and Marianne traveled tirelessly, establishing partnerships with universities and businesses in various countries. The work was exhausting but deeply rewarding. Seeing young people from different parts of the world connecting, sharing dreams, and supporting each other was a reward no money could buy. However, not everything was smooth sailing. The expansion brought new challenges and pressures for the couple. Long work hours and constant travel began to take their toll. One night, after returning from a particularly stressful trip to Africa, Marianne broke down. "Richard, I don't know if I can keep up this pace," she confessed, exhausted. "I feel like we're losing something important." Richard looked at her, concerned. "What do you mean?" Marianne hesitated before answering. "Us. We're so focused on helping others that sometimes I forget about the two of us, about our relationship." Marianne's words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He realized that in their enthusiasm to change the world, they had neglected their own relationship. "You're right," he said softly, pulling her close. "We need to find a balance. How about we take a vacation? Just the two of us?" Marianne smiled, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. That would be perfect. In the weeks that followed, Richard and Marianne rediscovered each other. They spent 2 weeks on a remote island in the Caribbean, far from phones, emails, and responsibilities. They swam in crystal-clear waters, walked along deserted beaches, and rekindled the passion that had initially brought them together. During this vacation, they made a promise to each other. No matter how important the Foundation's work was, their relationship would always come first. They decided to set clear boundaries between work and personal life, regularly reserving time just for themselves. Upon returning to the United States, they felt renewed and more united than ever. With a fresh perspective, they began restructuring the Foundation, delegating more responsibilities and building a team strong enough to sustain international expansion without overwhelming them. On a sunny afternoon, sitting on the same bench in Central Park, where they had reconciled months earlier, Richard turned to Marianne with a mysterious smile. "You know, there's something I've been thinking about for a while," he began. Marianne looked at him, curious. "What is it?" Richard took a deep breath before continuing. "Marianne Sanders, you've made me a better man. You showed me a greater purpose in life, and I can't imagine my future without you by my side." Slowly he knelt before her, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "Marianne, will you marry me?" The world seemed to stop at that moment. Marianne looked at the sparkling ring, then into Richard's love-filled eyes. Tears of happiness began streaming down her face. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." As Richard slid the ring onto her finger, Marianne felt as though all the pieces of her life had finally fallen into place. She had found not just love, but a partner, a companion in their shared mission. The couple embraced, their hearts beating as one. There, on that park bench with the sun setting on the horizon, Richard and Marianne sealed not only their commitment to each other, but also to the future they would build together, a future of love, purpose, and positive impact on the world. As they walked hand in hand through the park, both knew that no matter what challenges the future held, they would face them together. For they had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that true love not only overcomes differences, but transforms them into strength. And so, with hearts full of hope and eyes fixed on the horizon, Richard and Marianne prepared for the next chapter of their journey, a chapter that promised to be the most exciting and rewarding of all. The announcement of Richard and Marianne's engagement sent shockwaves through New York's social and business circles. While many celebrated the union of the powerful businessman and the charismatic foundation director, others viewed the news with skepticism and even disdain. Wedding preparations soon became the talk of the town. Marianne, true to her practical nature, wanted something simple and intimate. Richard, on the other hand, felt pressured to host a grand event befitting his social status. "Richard, we don't need a circus," Marianne argued during a heated discussion. "What matters is our love, not the size of the party." Richard sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know, my love, but there are expectations, social obligations." It was at that moment that Richard's phone rang. It was Gavin, his longtime business partner and friend. "Richard, we need to talk." Gavin's voice sounded tense. "There's been a problem with our project in China. We need you here, now." Richard's blood ran cold. The China project was crucial for his company's international expansion. A failure there could have catastrophic consequences. Looking at Marianne, he saw understanding in her eyes before he even spoke. "Go," she said softly. "I'll handle things here." With a heavy heart, Richard left for China the next day. What should have been a one-week trip stretched into a month, then 2. The project was in crisis, demanding his constant attention. Meanwhile, in New York, Marianne found herself overwhelmed. Besides managing the foundation, she now had to deal with wedding preparations and the relentless scrutiny of the press. Richard's absence weighed on her more each day. It was during this time that a face from the past reappeared, Camille, Richard's ex-girlfriend. "Marianne, darling," Camille exclaimed, feigning surprise when they bumped into each other at a cafe. "What a coincidence." Marianne forced a smile, immediately feeling uneasy. "Hello, Camille." Camille sat down uninvited. "So, how are the preparations for the big day going?" It must be so hard to handle everything alone with Richard so busy in China. Camille's condescending tone didn't go unnoticed. Marianne felt a pang of insecurity but kept her composure. "We're managing." Of course," Camille continued, a sly smile on her lips. "You know, Marianne, I've known Richard for years. He's always been like this, you know. Work comes first, but I'm sure you understand, right? After all, it was his money that built your precious foundation." Camille's words hit Marianne like a slap. Before she could respond, Camille was already on her feet. "Well, it was a pleasure seeing you again. Good luck with the preparations." Marianne remained seated, Camille's words echoing in her mind. The old insecurities she thought she had overcome began to resurface. That night, during the video call with Richard, Marianne was distant, lost in thought. "Is everything all right, my love?" Richard asked, concerned. Marianne hesitated before answering. "Richard, do you think we rushed things? With the wedding, I mean." Richard frowned, surprised. "What are you talking about, Marianne? I thought we were happy about it." "We are, it's just—" Marianne paused, gathering courage. "Sometimes I wonder if I really belong in your world, if I'm not holding you back somehow." Richard felt his heart tighten. "Marianne, you are my world. Nothing matters more than us." But the words, as sincere as they were, felt hollow through the cold computer screen. The distance between them, both physical and emotional, seemed greater than ever. In the weeks that followed, the tension continued to grow. Marianne buried herself in the foundation's work, expanding programs and launching new projects almost frantically. Richard, meanwhile, found himself trapped in an endless web of commitments and negotiations in China. It was during this time that Marianne received a tempting offer to lead a UN project focused on girls' education in developing countries. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, a chance to impact millions of lives, but accepting would mean postponing the wedding and spending months traveling the world. It would mean once again putting distance between her and Richard. One night, unable to sleep, Marianne found herself replaying her entire journey with Richard. The unexpected meeting when she was selling water, the highs and lows of their relationship, the challenges they had overcome together. Each memory carried with it a mix of deep love and fear of the future. On the other side of the world, Richard was also awake, gazing at the illuminated city of Shanghai. In his hands he held the engagement ring he had bought for Marianne, but never had the chance to give her in person. The weight of the object seemed to symbolize all the promises made and the dreams still unfulfilled. Both knew they were reaching a crucial decision point. The love they felt for each other was undeniable, but would it be enough to overcome the challenges they faced? The differences in their worlds, which once seemed conquered, now felt more pronounced than ever. Marianne looked at her phone, her finger hovering over Richard's name. Richard stared out the window, contemplating taking the next flight home. The fate of their relationship and their individual dreams hung by a thread. The choices they would make in the next few hours would shape not only their futures, but also the impact they would have on the world. As the night wore on, both Richard and Marianne found themselves confronted with the same agonizing question. How do you balance personal love with a greater purpose? And was that balance even possible? The sound of a ringing phone shattered the night silence. The phone's ring echoed through the quiet room. Marianne, her heart racing, answered. "Richard?" Her voice trembled slightly. "Marianne, I'm coming home." Richard's voice sounded determined on the other end of the line. "I took the first available flight. We need to talk." Relief and anxiety swirled in Marianne's chest. "Yes, we really do." The hours that followed were the longest of Marianne's life. When she finally heard the key turning in the lock, her heart felt like it might leap out of her mouth. Richard walked in, looking exhausted but with a determined gleam in his eyes. For a moment they stood there just looking at each other, years of love, challenges and shared dreams hanging between them. It was Marianne who broke the silence. "Richard, Wait," he gently interrupted, taking her hands. "Before anything else, I need to tell you something." He guided her to the couch where they sat, still holding hands. "Marianne, these months in China made me realize something crucial," Richard began, his voice full of emotion. "I realized that all the success in the world means nothing if I don't have you by my side. But I also understood that our love can't be a prison. It should be a force that drives us to be better, to do more for the world." Marianne felt tears forming in her eyes. "Richard, Let me finish, please," he asked softly. "I know about the UN project, and I think you should accept it." Marianne blinked, surprised. "But what? About the wedding, the foundation?" Richard smiled, stroking her face. "The wedding can wait. The foundation is in good hands with our team. What can't wait is the chance to impact millions of lives. Marianne, your work, your passion, they're part of what made me fall in love with you. I won't be the man who keeps you from reaching your full potential." Tears now streamed freely down Marianne's face. "But what about us? I don't want to lose you, Richard." "And you won't," he assured her, pulling her close. "Because I'm coming with you." Marianne pulled back, staring at him in shock. "What? But your company?" Richard chuckled softly. "Remember when we started the foundation? How it gave me a new purpose? Well, I've decided it's time to pass the torch at the company. Gavin and the team can handle day-to-day operations. I want to dedicate my time, my resources and my energy to supporting your work, to expanding the impact we can have on the world, together." Marianne was speechless, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what Richard was proposing. "But only if that's what you want," Richard quickly added. "If you'd rather do this alone, I understand and respect that. I just want you to know that no matter what you choose, I'll be here. Always." It was in that moment Marianne realized the true depth of their love. It wasn't just about feelings or attraction, but about companionship, mutual support, and a shared commitment to making a difference in the world. "Richard Montgomery," she said, cupping his face in her hands, "I love you more than I ever thought possible to love someone. And yes, I want you to come with me. I want to build that future together." The kiss that followed was full of promises, dreams, and a love that transcended any challenge. In the months that followed, Richard and Marianne embarked on a journey that would test their resilience, their commitment, and their love in ways they never imagined. They traveled through countries ravaged by poverty, faced bureaucracy, cultural resistance, and even physical dangers. But with every obstacle overcome, their bond grew stronger. Richard discovered a satisfaction in fieldwork that no corporate business had ever given him. Marianne, in turn, flourished as a leader, inspiring change in communities around the world. A year after their journey began, in a small village in Africa, Richard and Marianne finally exchanged their vows. It wasn't the grand event society expected, but an intimate ceremony, surrounded by smiling children and grateful families whose lives they had touched. As the sun set on the African horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Richard and Marianne danced their first dance as husband and wife. There was no sophisticated music, just the sound of clapping and traditional songs, but to them it was the most beautiful melody in the world. "You know," Marianne said, looking into her now husband's eyes, "when I was a child, I dreamed of changing the world. I never imagined I'd find someone to share that dream with me." Richard smiled, pulling her closer. "And I never imagined I'd find someone who would show me there's more to life than profit and power. You gave me purpose, Marianne, a purpose we share." As they danced under the African stars, surrounded by smiling faces and grateful hearts, Richard and Marianne knew they had found something rare and precious, a love that not only survived challenges, but was forged by them. A love that pushed them to be better, to do more, to dream bigger. And so, on a continent far from where their story began, Richard and Marianne started the next chapter of their lives. Not as a powerful businessman and a water seller, but as equal partners, united by love and a shared commitment to making the world a better place. Their journey was far from over. There were still many challenges to face, many lives to impact. But now they knew that together, there was nothing they couldn't overcome. Because they had discovered the true meaning of love and purpose, not as separate concepts, but as a single powerful force with the power to transform not only their lives, but the world around them. And so, under the starry African sky, Richard and Marianne sealed their commitment not just to each other, but to a future of infinite possibilities. A future where personal love and greater purpose were not conflicting forces but complementary ones, driving them to heights they never imagined reaching. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Richard and Marianne's journey has touched your hearts and inspired your souls. This story reminds us that true love doesn't just overcome differences, it transforms them into strength. That purpose in life can be found in the most unexpected places, and that together we can achieve extraordinary things. If this narrative resonated with you, don't hesitate to share it. Leave a comment telling us which part moved or inspired you the most. Your perspective might shed light on aspects of the story others missed. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories exploring the complexities of love, relationships, and personal growth. Turn on notifications to be the first to know when we release new content. And remember, just like Richard and Marianne, each of us has the power to make a difference in the world. May this story serve as a reminder that with love, determination, and purpose, we can overcome any obstacle and create a lasting positive impact. Until the next story, keep dreaming, loving, and making the world a better place.